Welcome, friends, to Catholicism Explained on Truthinlovechannel. I am Ryan Patrick. I am a high school religion teacher.
I'm Ryan Joseph. I'm a catechist at a local parish.
And our lovely producer is Mandy. Our goal here is to answer the call of our late beloved John Paul II, to stand in the truth with love. We want to share our Catholic faith with those who may or may not be Catholic, and to welcome, as far as possible, interreligious dialogue, dialogue that is both intelligent and civil. We welcome your questions, comments, and funny stories at truthinlovechannel@gmail.com and on our YouTube channel.
And the first thing we're going to be going over today is St. Brigid. Her feast day was yesterday, and
February 1st.
Yes, and we wanted to go over what St. Brigid was all about. And I'm no expert at it, but Patrick is. So Patrick, could you please go over it?
Yes, indeed. St. Brigid was a Christian nun in the 5th century in Ireland. As a matter of fact, she is one of the three great patrons of Ireland, along with St. Patrick and St. Columkill, also known as St. Columba. In the early church, there were two specific demographics of people in the Roman Empire who found Christianity to be very popular. Can you guess what those two demographics were?
I want to say slaves,
Yes.
and I don't.
Women.
Women.
Slaves and women.
Okay, all right.
Yes. Yes, slaves and women found Christianity to be very popular for the simple reason that Christianity afforded slaves and women dignity that they simply did not have in the wider Roman society. And so consequently, in those first few centuries of the Church, the first 5 or so centuries, there was a huge influx of slaves and women into the Christian Church. Well, our saint of the day, St. Brigid, was both. She was the child of a pagan chieftain and his Christian slave girl. Eventually, Brigid was freed, and against the wishes of her father, joined the monastery and took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience as a Christian nun. She worked her way up through the ranks and eventually became the abbess of the largest monastery in Ireland at the time, in Kildare. An abbey monastery which housed both men and women, very unique for its time, and Brigid, very unique for her time, had a position of authority over both men and women. So consequently, she was a very important figure in the Irish Church and the development of Irish Christianity, so much so that, as I said, she was called Mary of the Gaul, that is, Mary of the Celtic peoples, specifically Mary of the Irish people.
Now, like when you talk about Ireland, I mean, she's from Ireland. Usually, when people talk about Ireland, they immediately think of St. Patrick from a Catholic mindset. Do you know if she had any experience with St. Patrick? Did the overlay of their lives cross at any point?
Yes, St. Patrick evangelized Ireland in the mid to late 5th century, and that was more or less the time in which Brigid lived as well. So Brigid would have lived and worked in Ireland at about the time the island was being evangelized. So at this time in Ireland's history, Christianity very much existed side by side with the pagan religion of Ireland, which was Druidism.
Right, and it's funny you should bring that up because pagans or neo-pagans, as they like to call, associate Brigid as the goddess of healing and fertility. And there's this jump that when we talk about St. Brigid, that it's the same person. And do you have anything to say about that?
Right, right. It's important to remember that there's a difference between mythology and history, as simple as that sounds. Mythology and the stories that we receive from mythology, be it Greek mythology or Norse mythology or Irish mythology, very much exist in a time outside of time, right? A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, to use a phrase that most everyone is familiar with. History, not so. And when it comes to the Christian religion, with the revelation of God to Abraham, to Moses, to various kings and prophets in the Old Testament, and right up to Jesus, that these were events that happened in real time, in real places, in history, and thus also with our saints, and thus also with St. Brigid. We believe that she was a real woman in history. We have the historical record by which we can verify that fact. And we have her relics. We have her body amongst us.
Her jawbone.
Her
being
jawbone being the most famous relic of Brigid. So that would be the difference. It is true that she shares the name of a very popular pagan deity from her own time and place, the goddess Brigid, who was a mother goddess. And there, to be sure, there are points of contact between the old pagan goddess and the Christian saint. Brigid was a mother goddess. Saint Brigid was very much a mother figure in her own time and place. She would have been a mother figure as the abbess of the monastery at Kildare, and very much became a mother figure to Irish Christians, both in her own time and in the succeeding centuries.
Right, and I guess it's not unheard of for people to name their children after saints, after gods, after prophets. I mean, look at the Muslim religion. Muhammad is a very common name. In Latino America, Jesus is a very common name. And so just taking that from a historical context, it makes sense that, of course, someone would be named after a god or a deity.
Sure, absolutely, especially when you consider that Brigid's own father was not Christian, but was pagan. So, Brigid, a great lady.
Yeah.
I like her.
Yeah, I mean, she seems pretty interesting.
She is indeed. So what are we talking about today, Ryan?
Well, I just thought that would be an interesting intro, because feast days in general are misconstrued in so many ways. Look at St. Patrick's Day. It being a celebration.
When we drink green beer, right?
Right. No, it isn't. I mean, from an American standpoint, yes, but if you go to Ireland, that's not how they celebrate it. They celebrate it the traditional
black beer.
Yeah. But they also they do celebrate it as a feast
day.
This
episode of Truth and Love brought to you by Guinness. No.
But they celebrate it like what a feast day is. To go to mass and to honor that.
To honor God through His saints.
Right, to honor God through saints. That's a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
And then you've got St. Valentine's Day, which has just been taken off as a Hallmark holiday when it was not at all started that way.
Yep.
So, I just thought it would be interesting to start off with a feast day, especially as relevant as yesterday, St. Brigid. And St. Valentine's Day is coming up, so.
Absolutely, and it's appropriate on any feast day or any day of the calendar to talk about the great faith for which many of our saints died. All of them certainly lived for this faith. And really we start at the top, and we start with the creed, what we also call the symbol of faith. Not symbol in the sense of it's sort of a loose representation. Well, it's sort of a loose representation of the faith. But symbol here meaning a very brief and succinct and clear summary of everything that we believe as Christians and as Catholics.
Right.
And so, of course, we start with the first article in the Apostles' Creed. That is, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, Creator of heaven and earth. Right? And you could devote an entire episode of Catholicism Explained to just that one article of the Creed, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Okay.
So, what does it mean, first and foremost, what does it mean to say that we believe in one God? And I think that here is, a fundamental part of our belief as Catholics, as Christians, as people in the whole, in the broader Judeo-Christian tradition, where I think a lot of people get confused. And I think a lot of people think that to believe in one God, to be members of a monotheistic religion, means simply that we believe in one God as opposed to many. that it's merely a matter of number.
I would have no disagreement with you. I think compared to pagans when Christians first came out, when they said Jesus is the one God, pagans all over the Roman world would just stick him in with the rest of the pantheons that they had, and in fact Hinduism does that right now. That is something they just, with their several 100,000 gods, they just stick Jesus with the rest of them. And when we state that we believe in one God, it's not stating that, again, like you said, we're picking one of many. It's to say that there is only one.
There is only one God, according to our very unique definition of God.
Right. It's not just some imaginary person in the sky that kind of dictates what's going on Earth. That's a very, very oversimplified view, and to be frank, ignorant.
Well, yeah, and I think to understand what we as Christians, what we as people in the Judeo-Christian tradition mean by God, I think we have to go back to Scripture itself, specifically to the book of Exodus. We read in Exodus chapter 3 about Moses' encounter with God on Mount Sinai, that famous encounter with God in the burning bush. And Moses asks what could seem to us as a very simple and straightforward question. Moses says to God, "If I come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" He said further, God said to Moses, "I am who I am." He said further, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God also said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this my title for all generations." Now, one of our great saints in the Christian tradition, Thomas Aquinas, had a gloss on this very passage, and he said that another way of expressing this idea of God being "I am who I am" is to say that God is being itself. In Thomas Aquinas' Latin, ipsum esse. So God, by this definition, is not merely one God among many. He's not one being among many, right? So you can't meaningfully say about God, "Oh, here's me, and there's you, and there's this computer, and then there's God," right? That's a fundamental category error, right? God is not one being among many, but being itself. And can only therefore be one, right? So that's the difference between the God who is worshipped by the Jews and by Christians, and the various gods and goddesses who are worshipped by the other ancient religions.
So, would you like to continue on with the rest of the Apostles' Creed, where it talks about the?
Well, I think that we can. I think that there's definitely room to linger on this.
Okay.
Take it from a historical perspective. The belief in one God as merely a matter of number is really not new. That was not the new thing, the new and unheard of thing that Judaism introduced to the ancient world. Because as we know from history, there was a pharaoh named Akhenaten in ancient Egypt. Tutankhamun's father, yes, yeah. Tutankhamun's father, who worshipped one god, the god Aten, the sun god. And he imposed his religion, which was monotheistic in some sense of the word, on the rest of the country. We know, of course, that didn't last, and Akhenaten's son, Tutankhamun, reimposed the traditional religion of Egypt on the country. But it's interesting to say that he was, in some sense of the word, monotheistic. He worshipped one God. What we have to remember is that this is still not the same as Israelite monotheism, because Aten, even though he was the only god who was worshipped by Akhenaten, that it was his cult and his cult alone that was imposed upon the country by Akhenaten, Aten himself was still a being in the world, and did not make sense apart from the existence of the world. Aten was the sun god, so even though you were only worshiping one god, it's the nature of that god that is the question.
Right, and I don't know if many people know about this, but the Book of Wisdom goes into explaining very much what you're explaining is that the gods that are described in a lot of the pagan world and other religions are mechanisms, are just shown to be mechanisms from the description that we give as God being itself, as opposed to the god of fertility or the god of the water.
We talk sometimes in philosophy about the necessary and the contingent, right? A being that is necessary, you could not in principle imagine him not existing, right? Contingent things, you could easily in principle imagine them not existing, right? Many of the gods of the ancient religions are contingent beings, right? They are in the world, they are parts of the world. Their existence does not make sense apart from the existence of the wider world, right? Not
Right.
so with the God who is worshipped by Jews and Christians. He is that which it is impossible to imagine not being. He is the necessary being. So that's really the most fundamental and essential difference between gods the God that Jews and Christians worship, and the God who exists in the minds of many of our, dare I say it, many of our atheist interlocutors, right?
Right.
We've heard time and time again about, the flying spaghetti monster, right? Your God is the flying spaghetti monster, and perhaps on one level we shouldn't take such silly arguments too seriously, but perhaps in another sense, we can and should say that, yeah, but the flying spaghetti monster is still a contingent being. As fantastical as he is still a being in the world, as being contained by the world and part of the world, right?
Right.
So, I think when it comes to our dialogue with atheists, in many cases, our atheist interlocutors are equivocating on what we mean by God.
Right, and I think a lot of that has to do with how we, as Christians in general, have distributed into the many different denominations, and how we explain what God is. And so there ends up being a complication in that you have one denomination saying God is only this, and God is this, and God is that, and they oversimplify to the rest of the world what we're really trying to get at, which is God is, and that is it.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but I think that largely comes from the jettisoning of the Christian intellectual tradition. I think as embodied by Thomas Aquinas, and certainly many other people in our theological tradition. I think particularly of Anselm or Bonaventure, or even in more recent times, John Henry Newman.
Mm-hmm.
Right, sometime in the Renaissance, we as a Christian community just sort of set that intellectual tradition on the shelf.
Right.
And said, we're not going to bother with philosophy, we're not going to bother with the sciences, we're not going to bother with talking about God in this rational way, much to our detriment.
Right, and it leads to many unnecessary confrontations in the modern world. But we don't have much time. We're trying to keep this to a 20-minute minimum.
Indeed.
And we're about to hit that. So we'd just like to thank you for listening, and we appreciate you taking the time to listen to us, to get to know us, and please leave a comment if you have any questions or funny stories, as Ryan mentioned at the beginning.
Right. We love funny stories. Right. Thanks again, and God bless you all.